Hey, I'm Donovan Keith. I'm the product manager for Capsules at Maxon, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to use scene nodes to procedurally generate chairs inside of Cinema 4D. And yes, this is a bait and switch. The first thing I want to do before we get into modeling a chair, which I hate to break it to you, is probably going to look more like 6 cubes stuck together than any one of the chairs that you see here, is to help you answer an important question. Should I be trying to build what I'm doing here in scene nodes, or is there an easier and better solution to my artistic problem? And if your goal is to get a chair into your scene that looks good as quickly as possible, probably the easiest way to do that is to go into your assets browser. I'm going to click on the All tab here. Let's take a look at some of the models that we have available and take a look at the seating category. And inside of here, there's a large collection of beautifully shaded chairs, all ready to go with Redshift. Some of them are Maxon One exclusives, but many of them are not. You can just drag these right into your scene, place them as you will, rotate them, and they're ready to go. They're render ready. They're going to look great. So if what you need is a chair for your project, this is probably the wrong tutorial for you. So if instead you want to learn more about scene nodes, if you want to learn the basics of how we approach building our own sort of nodal capsules here at Maxon, and learn the fundamentals, of procedural modeling, stay tuned, and we're going to go through a very basic introduction to modeling a chair in scene nodes in Cinema 4D. So when does it make sense to use something like scene nodes? When does it make sense to procedurally model something? Well, first I'd say, can you make it in the Objects Manager in Cinema 4D? If so, that's probably where you should start. It's a great environment. You can work very quickly. Scene nodes and other procedural modeling workflows are most useful when you need to make a lot of variations on a similar thing. And they're also useful when you anticipate that a client is going to come back to you with a lot of requests for changes, a lot of things that, we're going to want to tweak the height of the chair, the width of the chair, and it's going to be too fiddly to go in there and tweak those manually with the models yourself. So now that that is out of the way, I'm excited to begin with you. And the first thing that I like to do is just kind of mock up what my general approach is going to be using the classic tools. I'll sometimes even sketch this out on paper. So what we're going to be doing is taking something like a cube like this, making it a bit smaller on each of the sides, maybe something like, 20, and let's say 80 centimeters, and maybe the seat is a bit too big, so let's say it is 60 by 60, and maybe it is 5 high. Okay, so I've got a seat, I've got a leg. I want to adjust the size of these things. I'm going to get my one leg. I'm going to adjust the sizing. And then I'm going to want to somehow get these 4 legs onto the corners here. We can see that already I'm sort of off to a fantastically bad start. Let's just grab all of these here, grabbing the legs here, right mouse button drag to select all of them, moving them up. I'm going to do something like move up these back areas to create the back of my chair. And then I'm going to maybe duplicate this, maybe rotate it, or maybe just size it differently, but I'm going to keep some of those sizes the same. And then I want to keep the back here sort of lined up. Now, this is truly hideous. And this is roughly what we're going to make. But what's nice about what we're about to make is that we'll be able to adjust the sizing of something like the legs, and all of the legs are going to update. We'll be able to adjust the width of this seat, and the legs are going to move in. You're not going to have to manually update them. You're not going to have to manually select them. And you will leave with a basic understanding of how to approach this problem. And you can just sort of use that same approach over and over again iteratively to add more detail, to make a more complex setup that feels good and rewarding. So now that we've got a basic game plan, seat, 4 legs, 2 in the back, and a backing for the seat, or for the backrest, that's what we're going to build, but we're going to build it in scene nodes now. So let's go ahead and create a new project file. And in this project file, we want to load in our sort of nodal workspace And so I'm going to click on where it says nodes up here in the upper right-hand corner. And this is going to bring up a node editor down below, which you're probably familiar with if you've used Redshift materials. It's going to bring up a console, which is useful for programming. It'll bring up errors if something goes wrong. But for me, it's just taking up space right now. So I'm going to drag this, grabbing that grip strip, dragging it over to layers. And now I've got a nice viewport, and I've got a nice empty node editor here. And I'm going to start populating my, my scene with the elements that I need. And the first thing that I need is something called a nodes mesh. And it's currently sort of hidden behind the commander, which you can access with Shift-C. And now that I've got the commander up, I'm going to start typing nodes. And the very first things that we're going to see are the nodes mesh, which allows you to make a basic primitive from the start, a nodes modifier, which can be used like a deformer to change things, a node selection, which can be used to procedurally select elements, or a node spline for making new splines. So one of the first questions you sort of have to ask yourself is, do I want the end result of this thing to be a mesh? Or do I want the end result of what I'm making here to be a spline? Now, looking at the chair we just saw, mesh was the right answer. If you're not sure, I generally find nodes mesh is a good starting point because you can kind of see splines in that workflow too. So I'm going to drag my nodes mesh into the objects manager. Now that I've got this, I want to start blocking out some shapes and also thinking about the parameters or the properties of a chair that I want to control. So let's start by adding in a box or a cube that can become the seat. So I'm going to go ahead and double click in the node editor to bring up my nodes commander, which is a version of the commander filtered to mostly nodes. And inside of here, there's a whole bunch of things that we can go to. Geo, so short for geometry, mesh. These are all of the sorts of polygon objects that we can easily create. There's a couple of them that appear to be missorted. That's my bad there. One of them is a cube. So you can just drag that in. But over time, you're going to learn the names of all of these nodes. You're going to learn what you're looking for. And in that case, just double click, type what you're looking for, and you'll probably find it. So now I've got a cube. Well, I have a cube, but I don't see it. I don't have a manipulator. How do I interact with this thing? The first thing we need to do is take this geometry out port and wire it into the output over here. And that is going to take this sort of like definition for a cube, and it is going to connect it all the way over here to the geometry out port, which is saying, make this cube for me. This output port is the most important thing in scene nodes. This is in control of everything. Geometry or whatever it is you're making has to successfully get all the way out to here. And really, it has to be requested at this end. And then something has to be built on the other end in order for it to get it back. So that's generally what we're trying to do, is we're just trying to all roads lead to this geometry output. And there's going to be a lot of tricks that we use to make sure that that's working well. So we've got our basic cube. And the first thing I like to do is name it based on what I want it to be. I want this cube to be a seat. So I've double clicked on the name, typed in seat. And now I want to adjust the sizing a bit. I've got a width, I've got a height, I've got a depth. So I'm not a chair expert, but I think that I'm not quite a meter wide. I think I'm like 2 feet wide. And so I'm going to type 2FT because I'm from the States and we don't understand numbers. So I'm going to type in 60 units. There we go. 60 centimeters is about right for width. Let's say the same is correct for depth. And then let's say the thickness of our chair is about 4 in, which gives me about 10 centimeters. Great. That feels cherry. Let's say actually 6 centimeters high. Yeah, that feels pretty good. So now I have a cube. Now, what you might think is, okay, great. I have got, I see an axis here. If I click and move it, I am moving the cube. Well, yes and no. What you have selected here is the nodes mesh in the objects manager. If I completely deselect the cube that we see here and I select the nodes mesh, oh, that's our axis. So the only real manipulator that you have access to is the manipulator for this entire group. And that's because we are not making objects. It might look that way. They have the same name of a lot of objects from Classic Cinema 4D. What we are actually making is geometry. we are making polygons, points, and we are directly moving around those polygons and those points in space. So every time we are transforming a thing, we're literally grabbing every point and shifting it over so it's got a new location, it's got a new name. Every single point is changing, and so it's more expensive, frankly, than just grabbing a cube, which always knows where its corners are, and moving that cube. The recipe stays the same, it just moves. Whereas with scene nodes, we are literally building geometry from scratch. Okay, I might have overused literally. I might have overused it. Okay, I've got my seat. This really doesn't feel like we've done much. How can I start to build a leg? Same process. For that, I am going to not start with a new cube. I'm going to command drag or control drag my existing seat. I'm going to call this leg. Great. And why would I do that instead of making a new one? Well, because I've already got some values over here that I think are going to be useful. So I know it's 6 thick. I know it's about 60 wide. What if I say it is actually 6 wide, 60 high, and 6 deep? Well, that would be interesting if we could see it, yeah? Well, that means that we need to get our leg to the geometry output so that it actually gets created. Okay, well, now we're doing better, but we're also doing worse. So what happened to our seat? Well, the seat isn't connected to the output. So I can try and connect it. There's even a keyboard shortcut I can use for that, right? You can right-click, output geometry, Q. Q for connect, I'll say, to the output here. Okay, this is working and it's not working. How do I get both of them? Well, again, our goal here at the final output here is a single piece of geometry, a single mesh. So we have to take these separate pieces of geometry and combine them into a single geometry. And for that, we have a node called connect. And this works kind of like the connect object in classic Cinema 4D. If I drag both of my wires into my connect and drag this over here, we now can see both our seat and our leg and the final output. And if you want to preview any one of these quickly, just select it, tap Q. Okay, well, I've got a leg, I've got a seat. How do I link them to each other? Well, we could do some math, right? We could come in here and we could say, well, this is this high, and well, this is this wide, and well, there's this thickness, and actually there's like a half thickness here, and we want to figure out like how much this little part right here is, and then we want to move this, however big this is, down so it's not here, but it's actually down that little. Okay, so there are ways to do this with calculations, with a bit of thinking, and that's a totally valid way of working. And I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna do some kind of wasteful and wacky things, so I don't have to do math because I really don't want to do math right now. So the thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna adjust the alignment of these meshes so that my math gets a lot easier. I'm gonna move the base of this seat up so that it's resting on the floor, right? So that I know exactly where the floor is, and I'm going to move this leg all the way down so it's resting exactly with the top of it at the floor here, so that then with those two things aligned, with this the seat resting here and this down here, it'll be a lot easier to line them all up. And maybe I'll have to punch in a couple of numbers, but it won't be so many. All right. So how do we do that? Let's take our nodes mesh. I'm going to reset the position here. So what we're seeing is, what we would expect. And I am now going to adjust the seat to start. So I'm selecting the seat and I'm pressing Q. And now I want to align it or tweak the axis, we'll say. So I'm going to hit Shift and search for Geo Axis. And this, you might even already have found this in the Objects Manager. It's pretty handy. What it does, once we wire it in, is it takes the points of your mesh and it finds their bounding box, and then it tries to shift all of the points up or down or front or back based on that bounding box. And here we've got it. I've adjusted the height on Y so that it's sitting up like so. Now, for the leg, I want to move it down like this. So I'm going to grab another geo axis. I'm going to drag it onto this wire, and I'm going to adjust it by sliding it down. And another thing that I'm going to do is my plan is to build out all the corners here. And I think that I want this corner right here. So I'm actually going to need my axis all the way over here so I can easily line this up with the width. So with my leg here, I'm going to adjust its axis on X and its axis on Z. And yeah, I can do that. Actually, I think I'm going to grab instead actually this corner over. No, this is correct. This is correct. So I'm sort of pivoting it like this. Now, if I connect both of these to my connect and I output this, we're going to see something wackier still. It doesn't look like we've really accomplished much. And that is because we still have these wires connected. So I'm going to disconnect those. Okay, so now I have got something that is at least maybe possibly standing, but it definitely doesn't look right yet. What are we going to do? Well, I promised we wouldn't do math. We're going to do like the littlest bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this point right here, right? This little leg, and I want to move it over here, and I want to move it down to this area here as well, which is effectively going to give us this point over here. So I need to figure out the width, and I need to figure out the depth that I want to move this thing. But really, the chair is something we already know the width and height of, right? We have an explicit width for this. We have an explicit depth for this. And that's going to be helpful. So what I want to do is get those numbers somehow. And the easiest way I can think of to get those numbers is to take my seat and start exposing some of those as inputs or as variables. So if I hit Command right here or Control and click on this dot, it is going to expose it in the Attributes Manager. If you forget that shortcut, just right-click. It's going to take a while the first time, and it'll be smooth after that. And you can choose Show in Node Editor. So now I've got a size. And I could say that this is my seat size, but I think I'm going to want some slightly different names here. So I've got this size. I've got the input for my seat. I also now want to just start adding inputs. Now I could right click and I could choose a very, very generic, but kind of specific sort of a number, a floating point number, like a 0.0, 0.1, 0.2. Or I can get a little bit trickier and I can get something that is exactly what I want. So I can double click and I can look inside of this user interface area. And here we see IO for input output, float for floating point. And here we've got just a generic float. We've got an angle or a seed value or a size or a strength, and size is what I want. If I click and drag size over here, it is going to give me a port called size with a size value of 0 to 100, let's say. I'm going to call this width. Next, I'm going to add another one of those. I'm going to hit Shift-C, IO size. This is my depth. It said how wide is my chair, how deep is my chair. IO size. Thickness. I'm going to, yeah. And I plan on having the same thickness for my legs, for my seat. And then, while we're adding all of these, let's just think about adding some more for some other chair properties, right? So we've got we have that, the width. We've got the depth. We're about to add, right, for the back over here, right? Woo! This is our height. And I'm going to be kind of lazy here. And I'm going to use the same value. So it's not going to be my total chair height. It's just going to be the height of my legs. So let's call it like leg height. And then I'm probably going to be lazy over here as well as my guess. And we're just going to make the back always be like half as high as these other things. So now I've got like a rough guide for my measurements. I've got a width, a depth, a thickness for the seat. And now I need to add another IO size. And this is going to be my leg height. Width, depth, leg height, thickness. Great. Let's tweak some of these values to bring them into what feels like a more sane scale. So we said 66 and 60. So I'm going to choose edit resource. So right click in there, edit resource. And now I'm going to select all of these properties and I'm going to adjust my maximum here, right? So the maximum I'm really going to say is like 100 units, because if you've got a chair that is more than, a meter tall, you're probably going to have a hard time sitting in it. If it is more than, certainly not 1,000, you wouldn't want. And the thickness here, maybe I'm wacky, but I don't want a chair that's like more than 10 centimeters thick for one of these wooden chairs, because I want to be able to lift it. And so we've got our leg height, so we've got our leg thicknesses. The width here and the depth, I'm going to hit Command to select both of these. So Shift doesn't work because you want to be able to select them individually. So if I hit Command, I can select both. I'm going to set the default here to 60. For thickness, I'm going to set the default value here to 6, which we established. And the leg height, I'm going to set that to maybe 50. I'm not really sure. Let's hope that works. And now I feel like I've got a pretty good list of basic values. So I've got my width, my depth, my leg height, my leg thickness. You can just directly wire these in. That works fine. These days, I like to take each port, drag it out, and you see that we get a floating version of that port. And I like to double click on the name and name it after what this is going to be. So I've got my width. I'm going to drag out my depth and rename it depth. I've got my height. I'm going to drag that out and rename it leg height. And I've got my thickness. I'm going to drag that out and I'm going to call that thickness. I'm also realizing that I am, 15, 20 minutes without a save. And I would say that when you're, working in a program, it's good to save regularly. And especially if you're doing this sort of like thing where you are basically programming. You've heard about software that crashes because of bugs. Well, congratulations. You are now sort of programming. You can create your very own bugs. You can accidentally make something loop forever. The computer will just do what you want forever, and you don't want to do that. So it's good to save so that if you have to force quit because you did something kind of silly, you can always go back. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to call this chair VO1, and you should see chair VO1. Great. Already feels like progress. So now I'm going to take my width parameter here. I'm going to set that to the X. So the width is this X value. The depth, I'm going to set that to the Z. So I'm going to drag from depth over to Z. And then the Y value here, you might be tempted to use height. That would not be a bad instinct, except that it would be wrong because it's not the height of the overall chair. It's the height of this little seat right here. So for that, we want the thickness. So I'm going to take the thickness, connect that into Y. And nothing has changed. And that is because our inputs, if we look at them, those values, we were very clever and we preset those to a nice, good value. If you didn't preset these, there's a chance that your seat looks a lot more like a cube right now. That's fine. You can just come in here and tweak the thickness, the depth, whatever it is. You now have some nice art directable controls for this pogo stick of a chair. I think they sell these for a lot of money as like a posture aid. Let's say that they do. Okay, so now we've got a seat. Oh my goodness, look at us, we're moving so fast. We've got a leg height that is doing nothing. It's connected to nothing. So what we want to do is connect it to something. So grab this cube right here. This is our leg. We want to expose some properties here. So I'm going to hit Command to expose the size of this leg. Now, it might get, I don't know if it's going to get confusing, but we have to be careful. So the leg height goes into the Y value. That is correct. it seems to have gotten a little bit shorter, and that's because I guess it is. The depth, you might be tempted to plug the depth into the depth, but that is going to give you something that looks odd, a very solid chair. Not a bad style if you want this, but not what we're trying to do. So what we actually want for X and for Z is to use this thickness value. So I'm going to X, Y, this is my thickness, excuse me. I want to grab my thickness. I'm just going to drag this out. I'm going to type thickness to name it there. And I'm going to use this thickness value for X and for Z. Now, we are about to have our very first procedural something. If I select my nodes mesh here and I adjust the width, oh my goodness, the width is changing. If I adjust the depth, oh my goodness, the depth is changing. If I adjust the thickness, oh, this is actually the first thing that we've done that shows off some of the actual useful powers of this, right? Like, because before you could have just adjusted a cube, that would have been fine. But now we've got a relationship between two different things where moving one slider is controlling multiple things at the same time. And this is where the power of this stuff really starts to kick in. Last but not least, I've got my leg height, which doesn't look like it's doing much, but we're doing something. So we've got this leg, we've got the good start, but we need, and we talked about this before, we need to get this very leg from here. I'm going to turn this on. We need to, here, I'm going to kill this. I'm going to start another one. I need to get this leg over here. We did a lot of work to make that possible. So let's do it. Let us take our leg and we're going to transform it. We're going to move it. And you can sort of remember transform because if you go to the coordinates tab, you see transform, and that's just a fancy say of move, scale, and rotate. So I'm going to double click here and I'm going to choose transform, and I want to transform geometry. So I'm going to click and drag this onto this wire. And we get here a transformation input that allows us to adjust these things, but we can't drag this here. There's no adjusting here, that doesn't seem like. And if we go over here and we start adjusting this, well, nothing is happening. And that is because this first input is the pivot matrix. This is sort of like defining a virtual axis, like where do you want to rotate around? And I'm saying, you're fine where you are. What I want to do is I want to transform, and you can see that it says transform. I want to transform you over on X. I want to transform you forward on Z. And let's figure out what happened here. And so it says I had to go 33 over, and I had to go minus 27 back. Well, what does that remind us of, if anything? What numbers is that sort of like? Well, 33, oh, well, that's kind of like 66-ish, 65-ish. It's half of that. So we can say, I've got a good instinct here. So I want to take my width. And so if I want, I can just command drag out my copy of my width right here. And I want to say that for my width, if I set this to the value for X, all of a sudden it's gone all the way over here, which is not what we want. We want it to go half that far. So I'm going to take my width. I'm going to do our first sort of mathematical operation. I'm going to double click and I'm going to choose divide. And I get arithmetic. So for all of your basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, you want this one. Click and drag it onto the wire. That's going to do you a favor of automatically selecting the correct data type here. And you'll know you've got the right data type because all of your little dots look happy. If you drag from one thing to another and you get a slightly angry looking dot, it might be okay. You might be meaning to do this, but it means that your data, the kind of number that you're playing with, it has changed types in some way. Something had to change in a way that maybe wasn't predictable. So we want to make sure that the data type, which right now is float for floating point numbers, matches. Okay. I'm now going to plug this into X for width. And all of a sudden, it's just gone back where it was. Technically, this is an impossible mathematical operation. I have asked to divide input 2 by 0. If I type in 1, it just puts it right back where it was. But if I go to 2, it goes halfway over. Now, this is this is my personal sort of like coding hygiene thing. You do not have to do this, right? Like if you know this is divide by 2, it's divide by 2. Don't worry about it. But what I like to do is to add something like a value node. So a value node is just a way of holding a number that you can name. So I'm going to call this 2. I'm going to type in 2. And this way, at a glance, I can look at my nodes and say, oh, the width is being divided by 2. And if I want to get even better or even cleverer, I can hit command forward slash. It's going to add a comment. I could also right click and choose, new note. So now, again, selecting this, command forward slash, I'm going to say half width, because that's what this represents. So now I have got this correctly aligned, at least in part. We're over here on the side. The next thing we need to do is bring this to the front. And we sort of figured out, or I bet we can guess, what we're going to do here. If it's half the width, maybe it's half the depth. Let's try that. So I'm going to take my depth, and I'm going to command drag this port over here so I get a second copy of it. We're going to do the same thing. But now there's a tricky thing that I can do, which is I like this chew. I want to keep this chew. And I want to make a new copy of this node. So what I can do is I can hold down command to drag out a new copy. But if I also hold down shift, it is going to maintain a connection to the existing wires. This isn't super essential right now. It's just 2 wires. But believe you me, someday you're going to have about 50 wires on a node, and you're going to be grateful for this. So I release my cursor or my mouse. Now I've got this here. And now I want to take my depth, and I'm going to plug that into the top port. It is now being divided by 2. And I'm going to call this half depth. Now, my half depth, if I plug this into Z, it should work, but no, what's happening? It's moved it this way, and it's sort of like sticking beyond the side. What is going on here? And what is going on is that we were clever, maybe too clever, maybe not clever enough, not sure which, and we moved our leg such that it was all set up and ready to live in exactly one spot. It was set up and ready so that it would nestle in neatly right here in this corner, and the axis for this is sort of like over here like so. And instead, what we've done is we have moved it to this corner, and it is, because of its current alignment, it's aligned like this. So we need to, rather than going this way, we need to go this way. And to reverse our direction, I'm going to try. I'm going to search for reverse, but I don't think it's going to give us what we want. Oh, look at that. I didn't even use the correct word, and I got kind of what I wanted. In fact, I got exactly what I wanted. I'm looking for a node called negate. And what that does is it takes a positive value and it makes it negative, or a negative value and it makes it positive. So I'm going to drag this down here, and I am going to connect it to depth. And I release, and all of a sudden, nothing has happened. Why is nothing happening? We just did a thing. Well, nothing is happening because, again, the most important port, the most important connection that happens is the one from the output here to whatever is happening. If there isn't a connection, nothing is executing. If there's no safe path to this, you're not going to get anything. So I'm now going to select this node here, the one that's bringing together all my parts. I'm going to tap the Q key, and here we go. We have got, oh my gosh, would you believe it? We have got a leg on this chair. I think we should just ship it because I'm kind of tired. I mean, we built a whole leg. We got a seat. Don't ask anyone to sit in it, but I think we're off to a good start. Okay. All right. Let's build the other legs. So how are we going to do that? How do we get 4 legs? Well, we could keep doing math, right? I could take this one and I could, I don't know, I could use my transform geometry, and now I could say, oh, this one, I'm going to move this one back depth on Z, and I'm going to plug that in. And that sort of works, but it doesn't work exactly because it's moved it too far. And then I could say, well, I could do this, and I could subtract, right? That arithmetic, I could subtract the thickness. And and it would be in the right place. Okay. And that's a fine way of working. But it can get a little bit messy. And there's a node that we can use that is going to make our lives much easier. It's the same node that you would reach for probably in the Objects Manager. It is something called Symmetry. So we would like to symmetrically reflect. So like imagine we go into the front right here. We draw a line, and all of a sudden, whatever is over here could get sort of copied, brought over here, and mirrored. And that what if we could do the same thing, not just side to side, but also front to back? That'd be pretty nifty. That would be pretty nifty indeed. So let's do that. Let's do that. So I am now going to take this leg, and I'm going to symmetry it, I guess, or I'm going to apply symmetry, whatever. I drag it over, and, well, that actually went pretty well. We went from, from positive x over to negative x, like so. That feels pretty good. Now, what if I wanted to mirror this also on another axis? Right now we're going from positive x to negative, and I also want to go from not positive z, but negative z to positive. Ooh, hoo, 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 hoo. And now I have got my legs. What happens if I go from negative to positive? Oh, okay. I overplayed my hand. So we've got something like this. So now we've got the base. In fact, if I had made a video about a table as opposed to a chair, we would already be done. But let's play around with this. What are some other techniques that we could use? Well, how are we going to create the back of our chair? How do we get these two front legs over there to the back? And there's a few ways that we could do this, but my instinct here is to do this as a two-parter. So we've successfully used Symmetry to create our two front legs. So I'm going to select this, Command / two front legs, or I could just call this front legs. Front legs. And I can now use Symmetry again. And I'm going to take my front legs, and I'm going to move from negative to positive. Now, I actually got us into a bit of trouble, and we can't tell that we're in trouble right now. But if I make this editable, and I do that, grab my polygons, I've got a leg. Well, that looks good. I'm going to grab my polygon right here, and I'm going to drag. Oh, maybe I'm doing better than I thought. Okay, I guess that the symmetry is smarter than I thought. It is actually not duplicating the geometry right in front, so we're kind of safe. But if it wasn't being this clever, if instead I could turn off my X reflection here. So now it's just going from minus to positive, and now I've got my, you would think, oh, these are the back legs. Actually, these are the front and back legs. So we have another set that we want to create. We want to somehow create our back legs sitting on top here. And there's like a bunch of ways that we could approach this. And I think the easiest way for me to do it is to be sort of lazy and not do math and just ask the computer to do math for me. So I'm going to do a geo axis, and we're going to do something with this symmetry. So I'm going to just select the symmetry and tap Q. So we're just looking at this. My goal is to get these legs up here like so, kind of centered, and maybe a little bit like this, so that when I move them back, I can move them back just the chair depth, and they'll go exactly where I want. Actually, okay, if I just move them up like so, I can then move them exactly back thickness, I think, roughly, and it should line up. So let's try it. So I've got my front legs. I'm going to use my geometry axis to get them sitting on the top like so. Like so, I say. And I am going to shift them forward like this so that we can do just a little bit of math and get them maybe back that half depth. So now I've got these right here. I'm going to transform geometry and transform these again. And now that I'm transforming them, I'm going to transform them back this half depth. So I'm dragging that half depth over to translation, to Z, unfolding this, and now we have a couple of sort of chair backs that are kind of where we want, sort of, maybe not exactly, or maybe exactly. Let's find out. To find out, I'm going to connect them into here, and I'm going to select this, and I'm going to wire it out. How did we do? I am honestly not sure. So I'm going to come in here, and I am going to, I'm just going to do one more transform at the end right here. Let's take a look at it and just shift it up. Oh, and what I see is it's actually resting inside of the seat. So I want it to move over that much, and then I want it to move up thickness. So I'm going to disconnect this second transform geometry, and I'm now going to grab this thickness node, command drag it out, and I'm going to use thickness for the Y value here. So we're getting the Z value from the half depth, and the thickness is coming from Y. And now we have got almost something. So the last thing I'm going to want to do is to somehow stick a cube in between these two that is, the correct width and all of those things. Now, I'm trying to figure out how lazy I want to be, whether I want to do a bit of math or I want to do a bunch of sort of geometry transforms. This geometry transform workflow is kind of silly, kind of fun, so let's keep playing with that. So I'm going to use my geo axis node again, and I'm going to use this to line up my entire chair based on its bounding box, forward on Z and then down on Y, so that, I can just wire in a cube with the correct dimensions and it will perfectly line up right there. So if I wanted, I could add another connect right here that will accept another cube. I'm going to call this my back support. And let's plug this into our connect. And now we have a gigantic box sitting on our chair. Well, we're going to need some numbers. We're going to need to plug in some numbers. So I'm going to expose the size here. The width. Let's see if we can get away with using the width of the chair. So I'm going to command drag this over, and I'm going to plug this into width. And if I look at this from the front, it is, it's so close, but not quite the width that we want. We want this to be less this thickness and less this thickness. So we want to subtract 2 times thickness. So I'm going to do a subtract node. And I'm going to look for my thickness. Okay, I've got a thickness. Do I have a double thickness anywhere? I do not have a double thickness. So I'm going to take my thickness, I'm going to copy it over here, and I'm going to multiply by 2. I do have a 2 laying around that I can just copy over. Again, command dragging. Select, command drag. Great. Wire that in. So now I've got a double thickness. And I guess I can do that as a comment like I've been doing elsewhere. So command / double thickness. And now I can subtract right here. Now I have got a piece that is at least the correct width, but it is way too thick. So now what I want to do is to adjust the thickness on Z. So I'm going to take this thickness value that I've got here, and I'm going to use my thickness on Z. Now it is the same thickness as these wider cubes, but it's sort of aligned strangely, and it's also way too tall. So what I want to do is make it half as tall as my leg height. So I'm going to grab my leg height. Do I have a half leg height anywhere? Do I have a leg height? Okay, I've got a leg height. And command drag that over. Now, for my y size, for my height, I want this to be divide by 2. I want this to be half my y height. Okay, we're doing better here. Now that I've got this more or less where I want it, how do I do this sort of like last bit of getting it over? Well, I could be like, well, I think, I could do a bit more math. I could say, well, this right here, if this is a half height, and then this right here, this is probably how much I need to move down, and that's probably another, it's half height over 2, which is like 1/4 height. Okay. And then I could, I got to move this for, I could do all of that. I'm going to use a lazy trick where I just move all of the geometry again. So I'm going to take my back support. I'm going to use my geo axis. I'm going to cough. And with this, I'm going to shift it down on Y. I'm going to shift it forward on Z. And I now have all of my pieces. And if I was being clever, I might want to add like some rounding to this. And I can come here, select this cube, if I select this cube, select this cube, and I could add a fillet. And I could adjust the rounding. And that actually makes sense, right? Like this is the simplest way to accomplish this thing. But I want to show off some of the modeling tools that we have access to. So I'm going to hit undo. Right now, again, these are not separate objects. This is one geometry we've made, and I'm going to perform a modeling operation on all of this geometry. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type chamfer. And there's a few of them. There's chamfer, there's spline chamfer, there's polygon bevel. So polygon bevel is for beveling polygons. Spline chamfer is for chamfering splines. Chamfer here is for edge or point beveling. So I can drag chamfer onto this right here. And oh my goodness, what happened? What has happened? Well, what has happened is we are adjusting the chamfer on every single point, which is not really what we want. We want to adjust the sort of the rounding on all of our edges. So I'm going to switch from points type to edges. And I want to just make sure that this is happening everywhere. So I'm going to type in a special keyword called all. And if you're curious about what that keyword is or where to find it or read more about it, just right click and choose show help. The next thing I want to do is I want to adjust my size. And this is a really small number. And to play around with it effectively, I need to hold down the Alt or Option key on my keyboard, click and drag so I've got sort of fine control. And then I just want to add a few segments, not a ton, just a few. So I'm going to increase my subdivision to 1, 2, 3, something like this. And you might have noticed this about rounded cubes in Cinema 4D, but they can kind of look a little bit pillowy sometimes. It's nothing bad. It's just like not quite what you want. And there's a new feature as of a couple versions ago where if you click on the Fong tag here, you can adjust the style of your normals from uniform, which just says like, I see they're all kind of the same, to something called square area weighted. And I'm probably going to get this wrong, but my understanding is that the bigger the polygon is, the more impact it has. The smaller the polygon is, the less impact it has. So the big flat square is saying, well, this is probably pretty flat. And the little round polygons are having a little bit of rounding. So this gives us a nice looking thing. But as you can tell, it's all sort of wrong. It's all under the ground. No one could sit in this. So the last thing we might want to do is to use, you probably guessed it, the geometry axis. Drag this on here, and all of a sudden it is at least centered, but it's not yet on the floor. I'm going to drag it up on Y, and we now have our chair. You know what? That is worth naming chair. And if we look at the network, it's not so bad. This is not a terrible approach for building this thing. Maybe I got too clever at points, maybe just a bit of math would have been an easier solution some of the time. And certainly, if you can do a little bit of arithmetic to save moving every single point in a multi-million-dollar point cloud or multi-million point cloud a few times, it's probably wiser. But with something as simple as this chair, a little bit of inefficiency I think is fine, because we're working as artists here. We're trying to get something done. We're trying to get to an artistic result. So we've got our chair. And I'm afraid to look at the timer right now, but I'm assuming it's been at least probably half an hour building this thing. Now, granted, I've been talking a lot. We could build this a lot faster if we were just trying to get work done. And I really could have modeled this in about a minute, 2 minutes. I did it at the start of this video. So why would we do, oh my goodness, I'm adjusting this and I'm adjusting this. And everything is just sort of like going together so nicely. It's exactly as I hoped it would be. What does this thing make beds? I think this thing makes beds, and that's tiny, tiny beds. But all of a sudden, not only do we have a chair maker, which is what I thought we were building, but we've also got the sort of the makings of an entire furniture set. So I could take this chair, and you know what? I'm going to call this table, and my table, I'm going to move this object over here, let's say, go into here, and we're just going to make some tweaks. If I recall, let's just go back in space and see some of the things that we did. We got this, and then it all started getting real tricky right around here. So I'm going to delete this junk so that we are back at this point in time, back here where we are connecting with this. And I'm just going to take this last geometry axis, plug it in there, wire that out. And now I've got a table generator. Oh, I want to bring in from this other one that chamfer. I think that chamfer is kind of nice, right? So let's bring in the chamfer. So now I've got a table and I've got a chair, and they are kind of a matched set. So I can adjust the width, I can adjust the height. We might, want to expand some of these values. And we've also got all the access that we've always had to Cinema 4D's classic sort of objects manager workflow. And we could, for example, grab a cloner, take our chair, drag it inside of there, and I'm going to use the radial cloner. And I'm going to make 4 copies. I'm going to adjust my radius. Now, all of a sudden, I've got my chairs that I can procedurally adjust their width, their height, their thickness. I can adjust their leg height, and I can go over here and I can, adjust those same values. I can adjust that thickness to make them look like they still sort of go together. I can adjust this leg height. And, we can create an entire sort of dining set that goes together and make it very easy to make these updates. I didn't have to build an entirely new thing. It's all still totally procedural. And these are the basic steps. And granted, there are much more complicated things that we can do, much more exciting things that we can do visually, but these are the basic concepts. To go over them again, you start with a primitive shape, the same way you do any sort of modeling. You're creating parameters, right? So you're coming in, you're searching for IO size, and you're dragging out some parameters that you want to play with. You're dragging them in, you're giving them useful names. You're connecting them to different things, so you know that the width is controlling this part of the seat. And then if you want, you can do something like play around with your geometry axis to align things. And that's really what a lot of the work is just finding an easy way for you to say that this thing connects to this thing here in this way, and building these sorts of procedural relationships to the different parts and pieces. And I'm going to turn off all of this so we can sort of see what's going on a little bit more. We're transforming the geometry. We're doing the symmetry for the legs. We're doing the symmetry for the front and the back. We're doing just the back. We're shifting them back. We are bringing it all together, and then we're shifting it down just to make our math a little bit easier. We're building up a back piece. We're aligning it so it's easy to connect with this other thing. And then we're just adding a little bit of a modeling chamfer, and we're outputting that final thing. So that is how you could build a chair how you can build a table, how you can still use every great thing about Cinema 4D to, for example, build these chairs like this, maybe even add a little bit of a random and just randomize, if not their positions on Y, their rotations just a little bit like so, to add a little bit of life to this piece. Maybe I will adjust my radius just a bit. There we are. We've got our table, we've got our chairs, and we've got the incredible ability at any point to come in here and do things like adjust the thickness for all of them together. And there's a lot that's really great about this. So there you go. That is my introduction to the very, very, very basics of how you would do procedural geometry creation, right? So it's a modeling of raw polygons using scene nodes, primitives, and a few clever tricks like the symmetry nodes right here. So I hope that you've been able to follow along. I hope that you feel like you've got a better understanding of this system right now. And I'm really excited to see what you're able to create. Can you take this thing and push it further? Can you create horizontal supports in these, right? Can you create something like this? How would you build this structure here? How would you adjust these pieces here? How could you create a bunch of them and create even spacing? How would you create this bottom piece? And how could you adjust the count of these? Maybe not based on a manual user control, but just based on the width of the chair and wanting to have an even spacing. How could you define those things? And the answer is going to be probably just a little bit of math, probably a transform node, and a little bit of creative thinking. And there's some more nodes you'll learn in the future, but that's the basics. This is how you get started. Thank you so much. And please post your questions. I look forward to seeing what you've created.